Welcome to FAB Conversations. I am Sonu Bhasin, and FAB is Families and Business. In the late 2000s, most of the 20-somethings were busy setting up businesses involving technology and were keeping quite away from brick and mortar. They were targeting the young customers or at most the middle-aged ones. However, my guest today decided to do just the opposite. She decided to set up a business which focused on senior citizens and a business that was rooted in the real world as opposed to the virtual world. In doing so, she became a pioneer in the industry. To talk about that, more about herself and her journey, I'm delighted to have with me Tara Singh Vachani, Vice Chairman, Max India, and Executive Chairman, Antara Senior Living. Welcome, Tara, and good to have you in our conversation today.
Thank you for having me, Sonu, and thank you for letting me do this from my car. So if I'm shaking around, it's because of that.
Yeah. It's not that you're in a disco and you're doing this multitasking that you're known for. The multitasking bit, not the disco bit. So Tara, you were in your 20s when you decided to set up Antara. And for those of you who do not know, Antara is the first of its kind senior living community. So Tara, why did you choose to focus on a customer segment that was more than double your age?
Right. So, Sonu, I wish I could say it was a bolt of lightning from the sky or something I grew up being very passionate about. I think the passion and the interest and the context for me just kept developing after this idea first landed in my ecosystem. And it came from a personal sense of, I think, always being interested to create something new and to create something to begin with. And I think we've chatted about this before. I don't do well being a fly on the wall. And honestly, at that point, when I realized that this country is functioning without an organized platform of products and services for this demography, it just seemed like a gap that somebody had to start to fill. Obviously, our work and our journey over the last 10 years has not even been able to fulfill 0.0005% of the demand. But the idea has been to create a category for others also to get aware and start to work in this space. So it didn't come, the passion once the idea and the concept started developing just became more and more intensified. And the opportunity started to present itself as a very robust one. So it seemed too many intersection points were coming together to not pursue this industry and this category.
Yeah. So, and like I said, you did become a pioneer, and you are one of 3 siblings. You have a brother and you have an older sister. So it's very unusual for family businesses, the next gen in family businesses, for the youngest, and that too a daughter, to become part of the business, to become almost the heir apparent. So was it right from your childhood that you knew that you were going to be part of the business, or did it again gradually dawn upon you?
My parents have been extremely liberal in many things in terms of the education and opportunities, dialogues and conversations we've had at home. And we were also led by example on the value of hard work and entrepreneurship. My father's journey wasn't handed over to him on a platter, let alone a silver platter. He built everything from scratch with, very little initial support from his family. And there was never a conversation growing up about any of us jumping into the business without showing passion, interest, competency, and dedication. So we spend most of our lives just doing the usual, studying hard, being good human beings, trying to represent our family values to the best that we can. And in that, the 3 of us as siblings are very synced. My sister, as she got older, chose to take more of a backseat. She did a lot of seva when it came to Max Healthcare and nurtured a lot of patient relationships. which she had the flexibility to do in her own time, in her own structure, in her own way. My brother's always been a very unique person. He was an organic farmer. He has a passion for ecology, he's a Buddhist in terms of his teaching and practice. And he went on a journey to create one, which is probably one of the world's best wellness retreats, which is based out of Dehradun, which is also a unique story in itself because he chose not to jump into any of the mainstream businesses. And he's extremely intelligent and diligent. So he would have earned his place in the existing businesses very early. And then there was me, who again, as my journey grew quite organically. So to be very honest with you, it all happened in an organic, natural way. There was never, my father was always very clear that he would build a business, which would then eventually he wanted to make an institution run by professionals. If we as children found our place in that ecosystem and we earned the right, he would give us that opportunity. So it wasn't that we were groomed in any particular way. It just actually happened organically. So much karma and destiny is in built into all of these journeys. And that's just how it happened, to be very, very transparent with you.
Yeah, yeah. So, when you did join Max, there was no Antara. You did spend, I think, a year or year and a half as part of your induction and shadowing various people. So, tell us a little about how you, what was your induction like? And two, when you did decide to focus on Antara, how did Max as a group take it?
Actually, I spent Sonu in my induction year. I was very bored. I say this with a lot of confidence now that, I like getting my hands dirty. I like being responsible for something. I like to be engaged and involved. In that 1 year, while I observed and learned simple basic things like coming to an office on time, managing your day properly, being organized, being responsible for outcomes by observing others, I didn't feel satiated. And having said that, it was that 1 year of induction that actually took me to Antara as an idea and a concept because of a conversation I was having with someone about this industry and this category. And when that seed got planted for me, there was no looking back. And not being a business major, not having done a business plan, making an Excel sheet, I definitely felt like I didn't have the skill set to pull all of this together, which was just an idea. And I think one of the learnings from my father has always been, always surround yourself with intelligent, competent people and don't be afraid to ask for help. And so I spent a year just putting people around me to say, look, here is what I cannot do. Can you help me do it? Without any embarrassment to say so. And putting all of that together gave me the ability to then create a tangible idea that I took to the Max India board at that point of time. The rigor, the hard work, the conversations, the debates were very grueling for someone who hadn't been through it before. Now, I'm sure a lot of people felt that, hey, maybe they were more softer on me. To me, it didn't feel like there was any exception. And my own, personal discipline and reputation for me is very, very important. So I wasn't taking this lightly. And at that point, the board was, of course, had a lot of trepidation. There was a significant amount of capital that one was asking for. It was a punt in many, many ways. But I think intuitively, everybody understands the need for these products and services. Fast forward, though, that there were so many challenges in the first community that we set up, which is why then the pivot that we made 2 years ago in terms of what would be more products and services in our platform have been very critical. So it was challenging, huge amount of learning. There's a lot I would have done differently. But that board process really equipped me for the questions that I was going to get going ahead.
Yeah. So, you are, there are many young inheritors like you who want to come back and be part of the business, but they may not always want to be part of the core business for a variety of reasons. And they do want to carve out a separate space for themselves. So to them, what are, the 3 things or 2-3 things that they need to keep in mind when they're looking at setting up or carving out a separate space for themselves, their ideas, what would help them, ease that process of
Right.
getting approvals from everybody, including the patriarch, including the professionals, including the whole board?
Yeah. I think for me, it would be four things. One is to really be passionate and convinced about your idea. Getting to that point of conviction and passion takes a lot of hard work. Like I said, a bolt of lightning from the sky saying, I want to make the best potato chips in the world is not enough to say I'm passionate about something. So you have to have passion with logic, with some level of hard work to be convinced of that passion. Two, you have to understand your product and service from the customer's point of view. That was a big learning for me. I went about creating our first community in Antara as an idealist, as a vision that I had in my own head. I was convinced I had done enough market research. I was convinced my customer was willing to pay for me for all the wonderful things I thought I was doing. But I was not in touch with reality of my customer enough. And I think that's very important for anybody. And these four things I'm mentioning, Sonu, actually apply whether you are inheritor or an entrepreneur starting with other people's capital, your own capital. It actually is the same all around, right? People respect and value you for these same four things. Three, be extremely prudent about capital. The truth of the matter is that I did feel that I had a support system behind me, and maybe therefore I wasn't as disciplined on point number 1 and 2 as I should have been. Having said that, over the years, I've realized no one is willing to give you a rupee of money unless you really don't know how to spend it well, right? It could be your father, your brother, or an investor, or your own hard-earned money. So being prudent with capital, this whole concept of crazy unicorns and valuations, frankly, are beyond me. That's just not how I intuitively function anymore. And four, like I mentioned, put a solid group of people around you who you can rely on. Your board, your investor will always value you by the people and the team you create. It's very, very true. Nothing happens with a one-man army. Nothing. Not your family life, not your business life, not your spiritual life. Nothing can exist with you just being on your own if you want to live in the real world. So I would say if these four things are taken care of, and you want to start something of your own in existing family environment, or like I mentioned, completely outside of it, this would be my personal learnings that I would like to share.
Yeah, no, that's, I think, very, very useful. So Antara was actually your baby even before you had your own children. And I do know that you were invested in Antara in every which way, emotionally and any which way. And I remember you told me that you even picked up chairs and arranged them for a press conference because, there was no
Of course,
chair,
that's the least of
right?
it.
Yeah, but now you are the executive chairman of Antara Senior Living, and your role has changed a bit. How has your role changed, and do you feel a little bit of, that withdrawal symptoms because you are not doing that day-to-day things, even though you are involved in it day-to-day?
Thank you for asking me that question. I think it's very pertinent at the life stage I am at. I think when you make your own choices and when those choices are governed by homework, rationality, self-introspection, withdrawal symptoms don't come, because actually for a control freak like me, I liked that I was in control of this decision. So in 2017 was, life-changing year for me in many ways. And it was at a time where I had been pushing the board and saying, look, we have to take a decision about, are we going to grow Antara as a business? We cannot just be a one community company sitting out of Dehradun. That's not why we started. And I know we have had a lot of headwinds, and therefore financially we have not gotten the outcomes that we had desired. But this is a very important, fork in the road for us to decide, are we going left or right, or are we stopping? And those conversations had started. And I knew at that point that if we had decided as a board, as a promoter family, that this is something we wanted to push ahead, I realized my own capacity and capability was not adequate for where this company could go and should go, frankly speaking. And that capacity, capability, I can have developed. But at that juncture in my life, I realized there were other things that I needed to do and I wanted to do. And this was before I even found out I was pregnant. So it wasn't because I was pregnant or having children or any of that. So that seed had been sown in my thinking. And then literally, when we opened the doors to Antara, Dehradun, which were my first baby, I found out I was expecting 10 days later. And I pushed through. It was a quiet year in the sense that we were not growing, but it was the first year of operations in Antara, Dehradun, and the most critical year for me. And fast forward 2018, this conversation became even more serious with my board, saying which way do we want to go? And I presented all the options to them. And to cut a long story short, by sort of late 2018, early 2019, the board was convinced that we had to grow the business. And I said, in which case I would like to start looking for a CEO. And I went the formal route and looked for a CEO. I got a very well-known, recruitment company on board, started that process, started interviewing people. And again, karma, destiny was by my side. And Rajat Mehta, who was a very senior founder member of Max Life Insurance, transitioned to Max Healthcare to turn Max Healthcare around before we sold it on to Radiant. We were able to convince him to say, listen, I know you've been a big fish, and we are asking you to come and be a bit of a small fish, but we need you. We need you to do what we want to do. And he was gracious enough to join us. And I think because of the trust factor and the value alignment that he and I have, this transition has been seamless for me. He took the version 2.0 of Antara, made it his own, built the leadership team to make them his own. When you inherit a team, it's difficult. And he and I have like I said, a relationship where we value each other enough, where if I ever start feeling a withdrawal symptom, I can say to him, Rajat, this is where I'm uncomfortable. And on day one, before we decided to work together, we had a contract in place, not a written contract, but an understanding of the areas that were close to my heart that I wanted to be involved and the rhythm I wanted to be involved in. And similarly, what were the areas he didn't want, me necessarily poking my nose, and we aligned. So I'm involved in the areas I'm passionate about. I enjoy at the rhythm and the pace that I want to, and I'm very grateful. It's a huge luxury to be able to stay involved in something at the pace and rhythm that you want without it affecting the business adversely. So overall, I'm extremely grateful for the position I'm in.
Yeah. So you've just spoken about the transition that you had over the last 10 odd years. But during the same period, you've also seen the senior citizen customer segment change a lot. So can you tell us how have you seen this customer segment change, and what in your opinion, or how in your opinion, is it going to change, say, in the coming 10, 15 years?
So I think the most obvious change has been mindset. Earlier, every time I would talk to someone about my product, I was called an old age home, irrespective of them knowing my price point, walking into my community, being served even champagne, I was being called an old age home. I have the opposite problem now. So that's the single biggest change, where this demography, either for themselves or children of this demography, have understood the formal need of products and services. The second big change, which was brought about by COVID, is the vulnerability of this demography has been blasted, and if this has not been a wake-up call, I don't think anything can be. What has not changed, which is sad, is that their propensity to pay, or the desire to want to pay for products and services has stayed stagnant. The government has not really organized themselves to facilitate corporates like us to take solid initiatives and bets in this industry. We still don't have a category for building a community. Our care homes vertical, which are really the next big bet for us, to the 30-bedded neighborhood concept where people come for short, medium, long-term care. There are no licenses for that. So we are neither a nursing home, nor are we this, nor are we that. A care at home, your entire home care industry has gotten no dispensation, where there is an ease of hiring people or nurses, etc. So policy has not aided us, and the propensity to pay of our client has not changed, but it will. There is no question about it, right? 220 million people over 60, the burden on the healthcare system, which has already collapsed, in my opinion. It's a huge pivot for the country at this point in time. So one has to be very sensible and smart about how we play our cards in this space. And which is why I'll spend quick sort of 20 seconds on what Antara version 2.0 therefore looks like. We were earlier just a residential vertical. Like Dehradun, we then launched Antara Noida, which has been, touch wood, a great experience for us. And then we launched 3 other verticals, which were care homes, which I've just described, care at home. So we take care, clinical care to the senior into their home, and Medcare products, which are aids and facilitation mechanisms for people who need products to make their quality of life better. Because our goal then became to be the platform for senior care. So we were able to therefore service a variety of needs and desires for this demography.
Yeah. No, sounds very interesting and sounds like a service that is required now. And you're right that the pandemic just made it even more visible, especially for people like us, as we are called, which is your target segment, that contacts and money cannot be substitutes for good care, which is available. So this is a customer segment that will learn how to pay. We as Indians don't want we want everything for free. But coming back to Max larger and Antara. So Max is known in the industry for the culture at work, right, which stems from the family. When you set up Antara, how did you bring your own stamp into Antara? So is it different? Is it the same? Is it a version of larger Max? What is the Antara culture like?
So, I think 2 things at the Max culture, and I hope everybody in the Max world feels this way. I'm sure there are people who have a difference of opinion, but my perspective has been 2 things amongst many. One being that we care a lot about LTFS, and this is a term we coined ourselves, which is look, touch, feel, smell. And that importance always somehow led us to creating expensive things. And that's where somewhere the challenges were for many of the Max companies, because we always had this vision of a certain experience and then we got stuck because the customer wasn't willing to pay. So while Antara started out with that same level of high LTFS, I think over the years I've tried to become more balanced. So me as an individual has very high LTFS aspirations, but I've learned a little bit how to manage that in the Antara framework, and stepping back was one of the ways to do that. So that's been one entry point in terms of, aligning with Max culture, and then a transition point. 2, for better or for worse, I think I'm an empathetic person. So people for me are the most important, and those relationships therefore. So I would always put a relationship before a commercial success or being tough. And that has been one of the Max value systems that we have carried forward. And again, Rajat and I have been able to therefore balance that out. And that transition has been seen. So the Antara culture has stayed high on LTFS, but with a little bit of sensibilities in terms of commercial success. We've stayed high on empathy, and we've stayed high on saying, and this is something I've stuck to, that when people meet anybody in the Antara system, they should say, "Ye achhe log hain." And that's not some tagline I've used in marketing. I want that to be how people feel after meeting us, saying whether you buy, you don't buy, whether we goof up, whether we do it right or we don't, that the intention of why we do what we do has to come through. And that for me is a pillar of Antara, where I want people to say, ye achhe log hain. Their intention, their aspiration is to do good.
Yeah. And I think I can vouch for that, because I do remember one of the first times that I did come into the Antara office when you were still in Okhla. It was a hot day, and my driver hadn't come, and I was all flustered. And I remember I walked into the Antara office, and no, I didn't even talk to the receptionist, but I just felt this huge sense of calm. So, when you say that, the whole experience, I think it does get reflected in the feeling, which is something that is totally intangible. So I do hope that the senior citizens also like to experience this. And my last question, since I am aware that you're on the road, besides Antara, you've had 2 children, right? How has motherhood changed you as a leader?
I think it's re-emphasized the need to be a multitasker, as you call me. I think it's only validated it for me. Earlier there would be guilt with multitasking, and sometimes you'd be criticized for taking on too much and trying to be overly organized and have systems in place and processes in place, and always be told, just relax a little bit, ease up. I'm an intense person, right? But I think being a mom has just made me realize that being an organized human being is important, whether it's in your workplace as a leader or generally as a leader at home. And 2, I think it's just made me watch out a lot more to prioritize my own values, because I realize everything I say, everything I do, I am being watched. And while I had realized that in my place of work, and one of the ways of doing that was we have fully glass offices. So, just sitting in a certain posture, you are being watched. But with your children, it's even more heightened. Everything you say, how you put yourself together every morning, how you react to situations, it's just changed me more to be more aware of what I think and what I say. And I think that spans in all dimensions of life. So I think these are the 2 things that have been heightened for me. And 3, it's just it's been the first unconditional love relationship in my life. Yeah. And I think that just it makes you more sensitive, therefore, to the good and the bad and the ugly that's around you in the world. So I think these 3 things have been a huge shift for me.
Yeah. So Tara, so thank you for your time. And I do wish all your children, Antara and the 2 daughters that you have, all the best. And I do hope that sometime soon we would be able to have an actual conversation in person, because the pandemic has just taken the joy out of the in-person conversations. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me, Sonu.